Hello, everyone. We're sitting here on Monday night, and I'm just as a backup creating a PowerPoint for Chapter 13. I know that you've already done Chapter 5, or some of you have by now, but that's okay. We'll work it out. Wanted to go ahead and make sure, like I say, and have a backup in case I'm not there on Tuesday night. And I'd much rather talk about learning disability in class and have you do an online version of Chapter 13, Gifted and Talented. So if you will pull out and open up PowerPoint that has my notes on it, I'll make sure that it's available by Tuesday night if that's what we need to do. So anyway, for Chapter 13, Gifted and Talented, you have the PowerPoint, you have the discussion board about gifted and talented, and then you need to develop a collection of resources about, just like you did with the other one, strategies for the gifted and talented at that point. I'm also going to look at SMART goals at the end of this so that we can be ready for to go over the goals part of learning disability on that. I'll also have later on this week I'll have some notes and some ways for you to look over ideas for the chapter test over the last 4 chapters that we'll do, which will be due on Sunday night. The best thing I can say on that is I would go ahead and write down the answers to your questions that I give you as your notes for the test, and that way you have them handy when you want to look them over. So we're going to go ahead and get on with Chapter 13. Over this chapter, we'll explain how the dynamics and evolving definition of giftedness has changed and how students are identified and served. We'll also describe the characteristics of the gifted students and explain why they need special education. Another point is identifying the estimated prevalence of gifted students. State guidelines for effectively and fairly identifying gifted students from racially, culturally, and economically different groups. And compare and contrast project-based learning, problem-based learning, and inquiry-based learning. We'll talk about those. So have your book ready along with your PowerPoint notes. We will also then describe the relative benefits of various placement options for gifted students. One of the first questions I normally ask in class, and I normally put on the board your answers to this question: why do you think students who are very bright need special education? I mean, at this point in time, you probably have thought about students that that are having trouble learning and trouble with academics in order to learn. Those would be the ones we would be talking about when we're talking about exceptionalities. But exceptionalities goes both ways. So in this one here, we're talking about those who are very bright and not necessarily on the where their cognitive abilities or other disabilities affect their willingness or their ability to learn education. And here is the definition that comes out of the book, or at least a small paragraph about it. Special education is necessary for children when their physical attributes and or learning abilities differ from the norm to such an extent that an individualized program of special education is required to meet their needs. So we've talked, in Chapter 4, and then we will Thursday in Chapter 5 possibly, about disabilities and affecting those students that are not living up to their ability level, possibly like a learning disability, or they don't have the cognitive ability and adaptive behavior skills to do well in the classroom, and they need that extra support. But here we're going to the other side of the balancing beam, so to speak. So just as traditional curriculum is often inappropriate for the child with a disability, it can also be inappropriate for the child who is gifted and talented. The traditional curriculum may not provide the kinds of challenges that a gifted student requires to learn most effectively. So when a traditional classroom curriculum is not allowing children who are gifted and talented to fulfill their potential to succeed fully in school, then special education is needed. So remember that thought process as we're going through this chapter. Compared to children of their own age, the child that's gifted and talented exhibits a high achievement capability in areas of intellectual, creative, leadership, or artistic capacity. So you're not only talking about the typical academic items, you're also talking about just being creative, leadership, or artistic, not autistic, but artistic capacity. They also excel in a specific academic field, or need services and activities not ordinarily provided by the school to develop those capabilities. The National Association for Gifted Children also has a definition that includes individuals who demonstrate outstanding levels of aptitude or competence in one or more domains. So those are a couple definitions. We also have a couple others. You've got Renzulli's three-trait definition, which is above average general intellectual abilities, high level of task commitment and creativity. You have Pareto's concept of talent development. And let me go ahead and pull out this a little bit. I pulled them out just so I would have with me, so now I need to put it back together. Renzulli's three-trait is on 437. And it also has a Venn diagram that might help you better understand the concept. Pareto defines gifted individuals, individuals who, by the way of having certain learning characteristics such as superior memory, observational powers, curiosity, creativity, and the ability to learn school-related subject matters rapidly and accurately with a minimum of drill and repetition, have a right to an education that is differentiated according to those characteristics. So he believed the children became apparent early and should be served from preschool through college to help them develop those skills and become who they need to be with that. And this typical curriculum is not going to be as beneficial for them. They're going to need to have that differentiated instruction that we've talked about on a couple other things. Maker's problem-solving perspective is also one that's talked about in the book. They have high intelligence, advanced creativity, and excellent problem-solving skills. So in theirs, a problem solver, one who enjoys the challenge of complexity and persists until the problem is solved in a satisfying way. Such an individual is capable of creating a new or more clear definition of an existing problem, devising new and more efficient or effective methods, and reaching solutions that may be different from the usual but are recognized as being effective, perhaps even more effective than the previous solutions. So there was Makers. And then there's state-by-state definitions, that involves general intelligence prevails across the states. Also other aspects of special abilities there. So each state can be a little bit different depending on where they're coming from. Characteristics that are talked about are rapidly acquire, retain, and use large amounts of information. Related one idea to another, so they're able to relate one idea to another very quickly, which helps them then remember those items. And appreciate multiple and opposing points of view are the general characteristics, and that's at the bottom of 438 and the top of 439. I do want you to watch, I'm not going to show the videos here because you wouldn't, of course, see the videos, but I do want you to watch a couple videos that are on savantism. There's Daniel Tammet, an autistic savant, and also the Rain Man twins, Flo and Kay. I'd like for you to go ahead and take some time and go ahead and click those and go ahead and watch those two short videos. So I'm going to go ahead and take a break and let you go ahead and watch those two videos. So go ahead and hit pause on the video feed, go ahead and watch those, and then come back to the next part of this PowerPoint, please. Okay, we'll go ahead and go back to the characteristics. Some of the other characteristics that is talked about is perceiving the operation of larger systems of knowledge not often recognized by the typical person, acquire and manipulate abstract symbol systems, solve problems by reframing the question and creating novel solutions, or precociousness, which is showing highly advanced abilities and skills at a young age, highly developed sense of moral judgment, fair play, compassion, and empathy. And I can think if you, as you watch the video, you probably saw some of those rapidly acquire, or part of them being able to remember various facts from different places and different times that the typical person would not have had the ability to do so. So those are part of those characteristics. When we're talking about creativity, we've heard that in a couple different definitions. The dimensions of creativity that the book talks about are fluency, flexibility, novelty or originality, elaboration, synthesizing ability, analyzing ability, and the ability to reorganize or redefine existing ideas, and complexity. So those are done at the bottom of 439, and they consider creative ability central to the definition of giftedness. Based on their review of 90 creative studies, this group defined creativity as the interaction among aptitude, process, and environment by which an individual or group produces a perceptible product that is both novel and useful as defined within a social content. That's on the bottom of 439, and then parts of that on top of 440, as far as looking back there and looking at your notes. Precocity and individual differences. They display creativeness, talents, or intellectual abilities that are highly advanced for their age. So, you're looking at the difference in, yes, they might be typical of, an adult with several years of training and work in the area, but here we're talking about, younger kids that have not had that training, and that, it would not typically be in the person of that age level or something like that. They're highly advanced for the age. Dimensions of individual differences. There may be inter-individual differences, intra-individual differences, and asynchrony. And what we're talking about there is on basically 440, 441. It talks about both of those basically being the individual differences among those gifted and talented students. So those are where that is. The prevalence is not, you're not looking at a lot. Gifted and talented, it comprise about 3 to 5% of the student population according to the federal reports. And I would highly suggest you remember that percent. And the percent, though, does vary widely from state to state. So Missouri's may be a little different, maybe a little higher, a little lower. But typically overall 3 to 5% of the student population. Identification, and assessment. Comprehensive and equitable assessments include group and individual IQ tests, achievement, proficiency, and state tests. They will normally put all of those kind of together, and the school may do some IQ tests and some achievement tests. Then they'll compare them to any state or district tests that they have taken to do that. They might also use portfolios of student work. When you're thinking about the different areas that the book talked about, you're not looking at an academic area that's easy to go and ask a teacher, okay, how are they doing in your class? You're talking about those creative items and those leadership items that are, may need those portfolios to show their advanced knowledge in those. They may also have teacher, parent, family, or caregiver, or self and peer nominations. So families will talk to teachers. Hey, they're getting this done so quick, or they've got an A in your class. They're really gaining those concepts quickly. What do they think? So they'll utilize those parent comments, those student comments, and those peer comments to go into identification. And also extracurricular or leisure activities would also come into play on some of these items. We also talked about in the beginning about the multicultural assessment. There is an underrepresentation of African American, Hispanic, and Native American students in gifted programs. And it is a problem, whether it comes down to a bias of tests or a bias of those portfolios, we don't really know. Low rates of referrals, though, because of educators' low expectations and use of those culturally biased tests and instruments are primarily to blame. So, that's what we're looking at there. There are 10 core attributes of giftedness across social, economic, ethnic, and racial groups. We're looking at communication skills, imagination or creativity, along with humor, inquiry, insight, interests, memory, motivation, problem solving, and reasoning. And you might look at the top of 443 on figure 13.3. Talks a little bit more about identification and assessment. I know that was one slide, a couple slides back, but want to make sure you look at that figure, look at those questions that they ask. That will help you better understand the questions that you might be asking as you get out and teaching. It talks about multicultural assessment identification, bottom of 443 to 445 in there. And there's some different bulleted points there in the middle of 444 to kind of take a look at there on that one. The other criteria for that is identify with a goal of inclusion rather than exclusion. Gather data upon multiple sources, very similar to what we talked about, with an IEP and looking at that evaluation. You got multiple sources that you want to collect data from to make sure you get a true picture of that child with giftedness and talentness. Use a combination of formal and informal testing techniques, and begin identification procedure as early as possible. As soon as you start seeing this and you start getting some ideas from other teachers, from parent, from the student itself, you're seeing the student really learning very quickly in your class, quicker than what you have experienced before. You can get peer information and help you with that. Some of the criteria: use unconventional and non-traditional measures involving arts and aesthetic expression, because again, you're not only looking at those academic items, you're looking at items that are outside of that box, so to speak. Use some information gathered during the identification process to help determine the curriculum, programs, and services. So after gathering that information from, possibly the portfolio, along with parent data and student data, then you get to put it together as part of a team and see how you want to create your curriculum for the student. In the absence of high-quality, culturally responsive instruction, culturally and racially diverse, gifted and talented students may distance themselves from the gifted label and be hesitant to enter and unwilling to stay in a gifted education program. So you need to monitor that also when you're starting to develop this curriculum and starting to talk to the family and the student to help them better understand what you're going to do. Here are some different ideas about the differences in some of the girls, some of the boys, and things like that. Gifted and talented girls, there's generally conflicts concerning role definition, poor self-concept, poor academic choices, and lack of support when you're looking at those gifted and talented girls. And this is all in 445. Gifted and talented boys, there's negative stereotyping for boys with talents in the arts. If they're involved in music or band or art, places like that, you've got negative stereotyping that goes along with that. So you have to watch that. There's also gifted and talented students with disabilities. Gifts and talents could be masked by their disability. So you may have a student that is learning disabled in math, but extremely talented in writing or reading or some other area. Again, it doesn't have to be academics. It might be some other area. It might be leadership or something like that. But that learning disability in math is kind of masking what their potential is in those areas of giftedness. They're called twice exceptional. Need a duly differentiated curriculum. So you're going to be looking at that possibly learning disability in math, and that's going to be on one side, and then you also then have this giftedness or talentedness in this other area that you need to also then differentiate that instruction. So that's where they get that duly differentiated curriculum. Here's another question a lot of times I'll ask. So I'll give you a few seconds and then I'll give you the answer. Of course, you've got the answer on your PowerPoint. So how can the general education classroom teacher provide instruction at the pace and depth needed by gifted and talented students while meeting the needs of other students in their classroom? 3 common approaches for teaching gifted and talented students are enrichment, curriculum compacting, and acceleration. Enrichment experiences allow students to investigate topics of interest. Curriculum compacting is the compression instructional content so students have more time to work on more challenging materials. where acceleration allows the student to move through the curriculum faster. Each of these approaches can be used by the regular classroom teacher. Although ability grouping has been an issue of considerable debate, it is one strategy that might enable regular classroom teachers to appropriately differentiate instruction. Grouping enables gifted students to be appropriately challenged through more rapid and advanced instruction, allowing gifted students to be grouped so they can progress at their own pace and preserve the student's motivation to learn and help prevent problems such as boredom and aversion towards school. So it's really a tight line as a teacher of what you're going to do. And on that one there, when you're talking about those differentiation and the academic approaches, you're looking at pages 448 and 449 of acceleration. And one common concern is that early admission and grade skipping will lead to social or emotional problems because the child will be in a classroom with older students who are more advanced physically and emotionally. I know I had this situation happen before, where you've got a student that advances, maybe two grade levels. Well, that puts them, when you're starting to look at middle school area and high school area, middle schoolers are starting to go through those changes in the body and things like that. And then high school, where you're starting to date, you're starting to drive, you're starting to get into those social atmospheres there, where if you've got a student that is, two grade levels, maybe even a third, that lower than that emotionally, then you've got some things you need to work through with that student and the parents involved with that, because that is a definite thing you're going to have to deal with as that student advances into those areas. It may not be as much of a problem when you're in those lower elementary grade levels, but when you get into the higher grade levels, it definitely is something that you need to watch. The overall educational goal for gifted and talented is the fullest possible development of every child's demonstrated and potential abilities, which means academically rigorous, increased relevance and depth of curriculum. It's thematic and interdisciplinary, include the structures, terminologies, and methodologies of various disciplines. Responsive to and respectful of gifted students' learning characteristics, match students' unique needs. So those are some different approaches to be thinking about too. And on that one there, we're talking about some of those. The other parts I wanted to mention is whether acceleration or enrichment is the most appropriate strategy depends on the subject matter and student. Some curriculum material, such as reading or social studies, readily lends itself to enrichment. Mathematics and foreign languages, because of their sequential nature, are ideally suited to acceleration. In mathematics, a child must learn to add before subtracting and must learn to multiply before dividing. By the time a gifted and talented student is in the 4th grade, he or she probably will have mastered the skills of reading. Enrichment with more complex reading materials is a way to differentiate. Where in mathematics, however, the subject matter proceeds from arithmetic to algebra to calculus and so on. So often one of the most difficult tasks for teachers is to persuade the administration and fellow teachers that acceleration in mathematics is necessary. So you really have to look at those, and that's on page 450 on that one there. Curriculum differentiation, tailoring teaching environments, curricula, and instructional practices to create appropriately different learning experiences for students with different needs, interests, readiness, and learning profiles. So that's the curriculum differentiation. Acceleration, we talked a little bit about that just now. Methods for increasing the speed which a student progresses through school. Curriculum compacting is one of those, where it assesses students' knowledge and skills in the target content areas, determine the content to be eliminated, and then substitute more appropriate content. The next one talks about is enrichment. Enables the student to probe or study specific matter, subject matter, a topic of interest, or a discipline at greater detail and depth. Accomplish process and content-related goals. School-wide enrichment model, it talks about that. And then accelerate or enrichment, again, what I just read, it depends on that subject matter. And all of those will be good for you to get a little bit more reading on 448 and 450, right around that area there. There will be some questions related to that on the test. Differentiate instruction in the classroom. You've got several different ways. You've got Bloom's taxonomy for phrasing questions and assignments. That's on 450. Teachers most often ask about knowledge, remember or recall and comprehension, understand questions. There's also the figure 13.4 that illustrates Bloom's taxonomy and helps you guide through some of those questions. So I would definitely take a little break now, hit pause, and look at 451 on figure 13.4. Talks about common verbs to phrase questions. Example, it gives you an example from the Cinderella story and possible student products that would go along with that. So take a couple minutes. I'm going to pause, take a couple minutes, and hit pause and look over figure 13.4. Okay, now let's go on to tiered lessons. That's on page 451. Tiered lessons provides different extensions of the same basic lesson for groups of slightly differing abilities. For example, after the teacher presents a basic lesson to the whole class, 3 groups of students might work on a follow-up activity or assignments at basic, middle, and high difficulty levels. And figure 13.5 shows an example of that. So on 452, look at that example. It gives you tiered lesson using riddles to promote thinking and problem solving. So you've got the author, then you've got curriculum areas, grade level 3, time required 30 minutes. Looks like a very standard, typical lesson plan at this point. Gives an overview, gives standards, gives materials you need. And then as a result, the students need to know riddles are written puzzles. They understand riddles require people to think creatively or people to not make assumptions. And they need to be able to solve the riddle. So, pre-assessment gives you a pre-assessment, some basic riddles. And then it has a middle hard riddle and a challenging riddle also for them to look through. So the teacher already has some different things for those different levels of students to be able to look at. So that's that tiered lesson. Then there's inquiry-based learning, which is at the bottom of page 52, 452. It's an evidence-based practice for teaching science that engages students in asking research questions, planning investigations, collecting and analyzing data, and deriving explanations and communicating their findings. So on that one there, you've got the figure 13.6 that has Heron's model for inquiry-based learning. So it's got the level of inquiry, it's got the research question, it's got the procedure, and then it's got the results. So you'll look through that to help you better understand those inquiry-based. Then there's problem-based learning and project-based learning. Problem-based learning is students who work together in small groups to seek solutions to real-world problems. The problems engage students' curiosity and initiate learning of a subject matter. So, the real-world problem, as it starts to create there, serves as the basis for each of the science units, and understanding and applying the concept of systems composes the overachieving theme. So it gives them the students a chance to look through those and then come up with real-world solutions to those problems. In project-based learning, students work together for an extended period of time to investigate an authentic question and produce a product or presentation designed to answer that question. So it's a recursive process that provides students valuable opportunities to think critically, create, and communicate as they explore open-ended questions, such as how can we solve the problem of homelessness? And then the students would go into in-depth research to come up with that solution to that problem or to that project-based learning on that one there. And then it talks about leadership skills. Being that many definitions of giftedness include the ability to effectively lead others. Leadership skills include inspiring others, directing activities, proposing agreement compromises, and keeping a group organized. So read a little bit more through that, because that would probably be a new one that you didn't really think about when you were thinking about giftedness and talent. So look at the leadership skills as another way, and that's at the page 454 on that one there. There's also different educational approaches on that one there. Let me go ahead. You've got, and that's on the bottom of 454 and also parts of 456 and 457. But you have internship and mentorship programs that talks about, you've got specialized courses, you've got junior great books part, and then you also have summer programs, and international experiences are also different types of educational approaches to that. Then it talks about the different placement options. And this is starts at 456 and goes through to basically about 460. There's a couple other learning activities in there. But it has ability grouping as one of those. Teaching gifted and talented students in a homogeneous groups of their intellectual and academic peers, or in a heterogeneous group of students encompassing a wide range of abilities. Then you have full-time grouping. And you've got special schools and special classrooms, special charter schools for gifted and talented students who have been established in some states where it's on a certain area, and those students that are high in that area, they go to that school, and that way they're kind of grouping those students together. There's also cluster ability grouping, where the top 5 to 8 highest percent performing students at a given grade level learn together in general ed classroom of mixed ability. So again, kind of grouping those higher ability level students together in the same classes. Then you have a resource room or pullout, where they will be pulled out of those classes on there. And that one there is on 458. Some educators believe that the resource room or pullout is the best option for pursuing GT students. Pullout programs offer many of the advantages of self-contained classrooms, but also pose a number of challenges. Administrators and teachers in schools with a resource room or pullout services should recognize that these do not stop being gifted when they leave the resource room. And go from there. And then there's also cluster performing groups, like ability, cooperative learning groups. I'd like for you to look at those. That's on the bottom of 458, along with consulting teacher model. I want to go over that a little bit more. Most GT students are served in general ed classrooms. If the school district has program for GT students, a teacher with special training and gifted education provides a direct and indirect support for the general education classroom teacher. Working in consultation with the general education classroom teacher, this special educator is sometimes called the facilitator, or a consulting teacher or intervention specialist might provide this specialized instruction in science, math, and humanities or other subjects. So read a little bit about that, but basically it's very similar to the special education teacher talking to the regular education teacher about how to best help educate the students with special needs. So it's very similar in a way to that consultation there. The last two slides on this involve another question. Should gifted students be educated with their same age peers or with older students who share the same intellectual and academic talents or interests? And we talked a little bit about this because gifted students learn at a faster rate than the other students. They benefit from a differentiated curriculum that can include enrichment and acceleration. Remember, with enrichment, differentiated instruction that can include stay in a class with the same age peers but study a topic in greater length. So that's enrichment. With acceleration, students move more quickly through the curriculum. And then grade skipping is one of the forms of acceleration we talked about, and you'll want to know some of those concerns, about that skipping with those. School personnel and parents are usually concerned that talented students will suffer from the pressure to achieve or will become emotional misfits. However, a longitudinal research found no evidence that acceleration harms willing students academically or socially. So anyway, that is going through the Chapter 13 PowerPoint. What I want to do is go back to, I told you I discussed a little bit of the discussion board on that one. Here we go. For this week, I want you to select any of the instructional approaches covered in this chapter as being appropriate for gifted and talented students. Then briefly describe the approach you have chosen and provide an example of how you might use it in the grade level and content area which you intend to teach. So think back to the area that you were looking at teaching. If you're looking at an elementary student, then look at elementary, and then look at the an academic area that you think you would like to use the approach. If you're looking at going into middle school or high school, then choose that and choose that content area that you're looking at going into. So if it's music or art or PE, then utilize that subject area in answering these questions. There is no responses required this week, but if you see something, I'd like for you to go ahead and make a response, but there's not needed. So that's chapter 13 discussion on that one there. Again, if you're listening to this video, it probably means that I am up in the city either awaiting my new grandson or seeing my grandson, and that's why we didn't have class tonight, if that is the case. So if that's the case and you're listening to this, what I want you to do is go ahead and do chapter 13's discussion board tonight. There's less time. I think this video right now is sitting at about 36 minutes, so we're not going to have as much time to talk about it. We would have talked about a lot more. I also then want you to look at what we would call SMART goals. And what that SMART stands for is specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And these are the type of goals that DESE wants all of the IEP goals, the annual goals that you have to write on the IEP, they want them to adhere to. So you have to look at any goal that you write, and first of all, make sure it's specific enough. Okay, you can't just say increases reading level. No, you need to add parts to that. Increase. Joey must increase his reading level from 4th grade level to a 5th grade level. Would be specific. Measurable. Well, by how much? By maybe 80% of the time. Okay, measurable, then attainable. Then you have to see, okay, is that really attainable for that student? You would not want to put, increase 3 grade levels in 1 academic year, because that's probably not attainable. And then the R, is it realistic? Okay, and then time bound. By when? When is this child going to attain this goal? So we'll discuss this a little bit more on the next class period. In a typical session, what I would be doing is we would go ahead and start chapter 5. Go ahead and start chapter 5, and then the next class period we would go ahead and have time to go ahead and go through the IEP that we're talking about for learning disabilities. So if we do not have class on Tuesday night, then I want you to go ahead and do this chapter 13 video and go ahead and do chapter 13's item on discussion board, and then look at SMART goals, and think about specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goals. And then on Thursday I will come and we'll talk about learning disabled, and then get into the IEP for a learning disabled student and talk about what those goals might be. If I am in class, then you won't be listening to this video, and we'll go ahead and start on. But anyway, let me see if there's anything else that we want to do. Let's see here. I think that is it for this time. Let me go here and look at one other section here. I think that is it for this time. So I hope you all have a lovely evening, and I will see you next time.